Okay, good afternoon, Devanshi. Good afternoon, Maneswini.
Good afternoon, sir.
All right, let's just wait for others to join. Okay, so the last few classes, we talked about the enzymes that have revolutionized molecular biology, which has basically made molecular biology and its application a commonplace, right? We saw many different enzymes, but typically two enzymes that are used very commonly for routine purpose of cloning and expression and all these things is restriction enzymes, various kinds of restriction enzymes and ligases, right? These two are routinely used along with Taq polymerase, because PCR has become very ubiquitous, right? It has when PCR was first, introduced to the world, it was fairly, limited to few laboratories in the world, and became because the ease with which things can be amplified, people found out polymerases, Taq polymerase, and then eventually PCR became so widely used. Today, I think PCRs are being demonstrated even in schools and colleges. The power of PCR has become that. Okay. Now, PCR is typically, the moment somebody says PCR, everybody thinks about Taq polymerase. Okay. That means the use of thermostable DNA polymerases to amplify, but that need not be the case. Okay, those of you who have attended what Dr. Nandlal and his PhD supervisor, they had given some webinars during our COVID lockdown. So they have, they not only they and several others have also used a technique called isothermal DNA amplification, which essentially involves the use of specialized DNA polymerases that are able to displace and they are able to synthesize rapidly new DNA from any given existing DNA. So this is called as isothermal DNA amplification. We are not going to look into that at this point in time. Maybe if time permits, we will do that. Two things that I wanted to clarify with the class. We are supposed to have assignments in this course, and we should also schedule our midterms sometime in the first week of October. Is that acceptable? I think we need to schedule a date, so I would request Devanshi to please check with all the students, and then let's arrive at a date sometime in October. Okay. Maybe the 4th, 5th, 6th, that turns out to be Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, one of those days. Maybe not in the class, after the class, and you could submit it, maybe the next, within the next few hours or something like that, the way we have been doing mid-semester exams. Okay. So mid-semester exam is one. The second is your assignments. Assignments will be on applications of this molecular biology in various fields like diagnostics, in archaeology, in paleontology, so many other things, right? So maybe I will go through the topics and then we will decide on the assignments part. Assignments, maybe I will tell the topics by tomorrow. I'll mail them and then hopefully we should have the assignments in another 2 weeks time. Okay, I don't want that to be extended. Okay, in 2 weeks time we can have the assignment. That means end of this month. All right. Is that acceptable?
Yes, sir.
Okay, great, great. Thank you so much. Okay, so as I said, restriction enzymes and ligases and Taq polymerases have played a very crucial role in exploration of molecular biology. Very quickly, we look at what are libraries, gene libraries. Okay, very specifically, we're going to look at two different libraries, genomic DNA libraries and cDNA libraries. Before we start the presentation, what I thought was there is a very short 4-minute lecture from MIT. So that kind of briefly explains, what the this thing is all about. Okay, there are a series of lectures. Okay, on cloning, and this is all being given by the topmost people in the field. So let's hear this on genomic and cDNA libraries, and then we will go into the presentation. Okay, so is the screen visible?
Yes, sir.
Okay.
Hello, and welcome to another help session on recombinant DNA. Today, we're going to discuss genomic libraries and cDNA libraries. So what is a genomic library? Well, with most organisms, the genome is really too large to deal with. It's too large to work with or to examine. So oftentimes, it's more useful to cut it down into smaller pieces that you can then examine. How do we make a genomic library? Well, we start off with our cell of interest. And the first thing that we're going to do is we're going to isolate all the DNA from the cell. Once we have the DNA, we're going to use restriction enzymes to cut it into smaller sections. Now, we have to be very careful when we choose which restriction enzyme we want to use. We want to use an enzyme that has enough restriction sites in the genome so that we'll get small enough pieces to put in the vector, but not so small that all the genes get
Yes,
cut.
this statement is very important. It should have enough restriction sites, but not too many restriction sites. We will see in our slide, what happens when there are too many restriction sites, or what happens when there are too few restriction sites.
Cut off. Usually, what we'll use as for the vector is a plasmid. A plasmid is a very standard and easy way to get foreign DNA into a bacteria. So we're going to cut up our DNA and the plasmid with a restriction enzyme. Sometimes we might even want to make two different libraries using two different restriction enzymes so that we'll have the cuts in different places. Once we have our cut up DNA and our plasmids, now we need to ligate them together using DNA ligase. Once the cDNA is pasted into the plasmid, now we're ready to actually transform them into bacteria. It's very easy to transform plasmids into bacteria. There are multiple different ways to do it. One common one is to use heat shock, whereby you heat the bacteria up and then cool it down rapidly, which causes little.
So when he talks about heat shock, he says heat up the bacteria and cool. It's not like, you're not going to heat it up to 100 degrees or 70 degrees or something like that. You're going to give a mild heat shock. You're going to expose these bacteria very briefly to 42 degrees centigrades, okay, less than a minute. And then you will be giving them a shock by plunging them into ice right away. From 42, it will directly go into ice. Okay, so that's a shock that it expresses. And in this process, typically what happens is small, holes, little holes open up so that this foreign DNA can enter into the cell.
Little holes to open up that allows the plasmids to be taken up. What we end up with are thousands of different bacteria cells, all with different sections of the DNA. So combined, all these different sections form the genome, the original genome we have, but they're in much smaller sections that are much easier to work with. And this combination of all these different cells forms your genomic library. So that's one type of library. Another type of library is a cDNA library. So the way that the cDNA library is different from a genomic library is that while the genomic library encompasses the entire genome of the cell, the cDNA library just looks at what genes are being expressed in the cell. So let's go over how we would make a cDNA library. What we're going to start off with is we're going to start off by isolating the mRNA. So the mRNA, clearly, the RNA that's being expressed in the cell. This is what's ultimately, the proteins are going to be produced by the cell. We're then going to use reverse transcription to create the DNA version of the RNA. This is what we're referring to again as the cDNA. Once we have the cDNA, we then need to add restriction sites to the ends of them. Remember before, we were just able to use innate restriction sites in the genomes, but for the cDNA library, we really want to keep the cDNA intact. We don't want to cut it up. So we just want to add restriction sites to the ends of the cDNA. Then we can treat the cDNA and the plasmids with restriction enzymes. Once again, once they've been cut up, we can.
These white this thing that you see are either linkers or adapters that we discussed in yesterday's class. Typically people use depending on the need. Different people use different. Either it could be adapters or linkers. Of course, some of these, as I said, have become historical. Now people would rather start using PCR, for cloning these genes.
You can use DNA ligase to combine the cut up plasmids and the cut up cDNA to the complete plasmid plus cDNA. And finally, once again, we can transform our bacteria. And then the combination of all of these cells, all with different.
So, whether you're making genomic DNA or cDNA library, this process is common. The process where you are going to use a vector DNA, which is a plasmid DNA in this case, and either the cDNA or the genomic DNA gets ligated, and then you transform it into bacteria, and now you have a pool of bacteria or a library of bacteria carrying different fragments of either your cDNA or your genomic DNA. That is what is going to make a library. So the last steps is common, ligation followed by transforming bacteria is going to be common.
Different types of cDNA form our cDNA library. And cDNA libraries are very useful if you want to compare the difference in protein expressions between two different cells. Thank you very much. This has been another help session.
All right. So let's see. So we will come back. There are a few more. So this is again from MIT by another professor. Okay. We will come back to this in a minute. Okay. We'll have a quick look at the slides. Okay. And then we will come back to these lectures as additional support. Okay. So this is still being made. Okay. So give me some time, and then hopefully we will complete. So this and the next few classes, we are going to look at gene libraries. Gene libraries predominantly come in two forms. One is called as the genomic library. The other is called as the cDNA library. Okay. I think I briefly alluded to this point earlier also. Whenever we talk about prokaryotes, right? Prokaryotes have the genomes are full of genes, right? There are no introns. You basically have the promoter followed by the gene, followed by the terminator, and then a short stretch of sequence. Then again the next promoter starts, right? Gene 2's promoter starts, followed by gene 2 and then its terminator. So it goes on and on and on, right? So the density of genes in prokaryotes is much, much, much higher compared to eukaryotes. Eukaryotes have, E. coli E. coli's genome is about 4 million base pairs and carries about anywhere between 4,000 to 5,000 genes. On a conservative estimate, around 4,000 genes. Okay. Human genome, on the other hand, is 3 billion, right? 3.2 billion. And so, between 4 million and 3.2 billion, there is how many orders of magnitude? There are at least, the human genome is bigger by a factor of 10 power 3, right? But if you look at the number of genes is not that great, okay? E. coli is supposed to have anywhere between 4,000 to 5,000 genes, and human is supposed to have around 25,000 genes. So, the number of genes do not seem to correspond to the genome size. Okay, and one of the reason why we have such a big genome is that our genes are punctuated by introns and very complex regulatory sequences. Right? We have what are called as the 5' untranslated regions, 3' untranslated regions. We have promoter sequences. We have enhancer sequences. We have several other sequences. Okay, which dot the entire landscape. So a gene which is typically 1 kilobase pair in E. coli can occupy several thousands of kilobase pairs in the human genome. Okay. Any idea what is the longest human genome or human gene in the genome? Anybody has any idea? Which is the biggest human gene? Okay, the biggest human gene is called human dystrophin gene. Okay, which takes about 24 hours to transcribe. Okay, it is several millions of base pairs long. It takes about 24 hours to transcribe. Has several exons and introns. Okay, the final messenger RNA is much smaller. It's much smaller compared to the actual gene size. Okay, the smallest gene, the smallest human gene is supposed to be around 14 base pairs long, and this is found in the Y chromosome, which is responsible for deciding whether the fetus is going to be a male or a female. Okay, it is supposed to be 14 base pairs. It is although it is still the work is in progress, but the general consensus is it is probably the smallest gene. Okay, so we will look at both genomic library and cDNA library from this perspective. Okay, so if you look at genomic library, typically most prokaryotic organisms, you would like to have a genomic library for prokaryotes. Okay, because there is no need for isolating the messenger RNA, converting it to messenger RNA and all that. Typically for eukaryotes, people generally go for cDNA or genomic DNA libraries depending on the studies that they are planning to conduct. Suppose I want to understand what is the upstream structure, what is the promoter structure for my gene. Suppose I already have a gene. Let's say I'm interested in understanding the human dystrophin gene, how it works and all that. And I want to understand what is the promoter structure and all that. Then for me, it will be better to have the genomic library. On the other hand, suppose I'm only interested in looking at, the protein part of it, then a cDNA library will be more appropriate. Okay. So when it comes to eukaryotes, both genomic and cDNA libraries are useful. It depends on the context of your study. Okay. But suppose, as I keep telling, this is just a hypothetical situation that you people, went on a trip and you found a novel bacterium, if that is the case, then we would be more interested in the genomic library rather than cDNA library. Why will you not do a cDNA library for a prokaryote? For the simple reason that you don't have introns. You don't have introns, and most likely, when you clone bits and pieces of DNA, you are probably going to have fairly intact. You will be able to recover the entire gene. Okay, so that is one reason why people don't go for cDNA libraries. I mean, it would be really. I don't know. How somebody would be able to justify going for a cDNA library for prokaryotes. Okay, so cDNA libraries are typically meant for eukaryotes. Okay, And genomic libraries are meant for prokaryotes, but you could also use genomic library for eukaryotes if you want to understand the promoter structure, if you want to understand what the enhancers are and all that. For those structural studies, you may be interested in a genomic library. Did I make the difference between genomic and cDNA libraries clear? I will send a write-up, but for today's class, this should suffice. Okay. Can we go to the next slide?
Sir, slides aren't moving.
Are they moving now?
Yes.
All right, all right. So if somebody gives you genomic DNA from humans, typically you could isolate human genomic DNA from a couple of sources. Typically, people would isolate human genomic DNA from saliva. Saliva will give you a lot of those squamous epithelial cells. All you need to do is spin down, and the saliva part is thrown, and the cells get pelleted. The cells can be lysed, okay, and you can make genomic DNA out of it. All right. The other thing you can do is to take a small amount of blood, typically about 5 ml. Okay, when you take 5 ml of your blood, and when you pass it through certain columns, where your RBCs can be removed. Okay, RBCs are cells without any nucleus, especially in humans. Okay, so they don't carry any genomic DNA. But on the other hand, they can actually mess up your genomic DNA. But your white blood cells, have lots of this thing, so they carry genomic DNA. Okay. So you have to get rid of the RBCs. Okay, and you are going to enrich for your WBCs. There are certain procedures by which you could do that. Okay, you could simply expose the whole blood to ammonium chloride, certain solutions. Okay, and ammonium chloride has this propensity to lyse RBCs selectively, but not WBCs. Okay, then you could enrich for WBCs, and you can lyse them with sodium dodecyl sulfate, and there are a few more components, and you can make genomic DNA. Okay, the this thing, whether you use squamous cell or if you use blood, you're going to end up having a diploid genome. That means for each each gene, you're going to have 2 copies of it. Okay, many people really don't prefer, but instead they would rather go for either a sperm or the egg cells. Okay, if you were to make genomic DNA from that, you're going to be having a haploid genome. It is much easier, understanding the haploid genome. Okay, you're not making a big this thing, whether it is paternal copy or maternal copy. The chromatin structure, the upstream structure is more or less the same, so there is not a big difference. So you're not going to make a big difference. Okay, so people would rather use reproductive cells, especially sperms or egg cells, to make the this thing libraries. Okay, so assuming that it's 3.2 billion base pairs per human haploid, the average chromosome length is about 13 million base pairs. Okay, the isolated genomic DNA from either the egg cells or from the sperm is cut with bacterial derived restriction enzymes. Okay, and this act of cutting, or making it into small fragments, is called as digestion. People call it as restriction digestion, because you're actually chopping it into smaller pieces. We all know about restriction enzymes, that these are proteins that recognize specific short nucleotide sequences and cut DNA at those sites. Yesterday we saw the video from the company called New England Biolabs, right? And bacteria contain, they have screened bacteria, literally from every continent. Okay, about so around 400 different restriction enzymes have been isolated and purified, and they have this ability to cut, different recognition sequences, right? For example, EcoR1 cuts GAATTC. It cuts right after the first G, and at the bottom stand after this G. If you look at the structure of the sequence, this is a palindrome, right? It reads GAATTC and it reads GAATTC in either orientation, 5 prime to 3 prime. So these are called as palindromes. And when it cleaves, it leaves a 5 prime G, and then this end will be hydroxyl. Similarly, this end will be phosphate and this end will be hydroxyl. So these ends are called as sticky ends. Okay, these ends are called as sticky ends. Okay, and these single-stranded DNA overhangs, which are resulting from these restriction digestions, are very, very helpful because it becomes very useful when you're trying to clone these fragments. Okay, so this is just giving you some examples of different restriction enzymes. Okay, remember TAC, which is from Thermus aquaticus, also has another restriction enzyme which recognizes this 4 base pair recognition sequence. And so in this case, these are 4 base pair cutters, right? Whether it is Staphylococcus aureus 3A1, SAU, Staphylococcus aureus, right? TAC is Thermus aquaticus. So each restriction enzyme is named after the bacterium from which it was isolated. Okay, the first letter stands for the generic name or genus, and this next 2 letters stands for the species name, or it could also mean if there are several different strains are available, they will designate after different strains also. For example, you have Eco R1, you have Eco R2, you also have Eco R3. So depending on, this is from Escherichia coli. So E stands for Escherichia, CO stands for coli. Okay, BAMH1, Bacillus amyloliquefaciens. Okay, strain H. This is the first enzyme from that. Okay. So you have different numberings. Okay, Hindi 3, for example, is from Haemophilus influenzae, strain D, and this was the third enzyme that was isolated. And the first 2 turned out to be not very useful. The third one seems to be very, very useful. So it depends on these things. Okay, NOT1 is from bacteria called Nocardia. Okay, so this is the species name. Okay, so that is why this is called as NOT1. Now, if you recognize this, things like TAC1, RS7, SAW3A, these recognize 4 base pair sequence. Things like EcoR1, BAMH1, Hindi 3, KPN1, CLAV1, or BSSH2, they recognize a 6 base pair sequence. If you look at NOT1, it recognizes a 8 base pair sequence. This is something that we talked about yesterday also, right? And the frequency with which my slides are not moving. Give me a minute. Am I audible?
Yes, sir, you are.
Okay, my slides are frozen. Maybe I should not even put on presentation mode, I guess. Let me see. There we go. Okay. So if you were to digest, typically when you take a 4 base pair cutter, then yesterday we saw a simple mathematical formula which says 4 to the power n, where n stands for the nucleotides which are recognized by the restriction enzyme. It's a 4 base pair, then it is 4 to the power 4. So it is 256 base pairs. So theoretically, assuming that the ATGC is distributed randomly, you will get a cut every 256 base pairs. If it's things like EcoR1, BAMH, which recognizes a 6 base pair specific sequence, then it is every 4 kilo base pairs. If it is NOT1, which recognizes 8 base pair, then every 65.5 kilo base pairs, once every 65.5 kilo base pairs, you are supposed to have theoretically one restriction site. It doesn't matter whether it is not one or any other 8 base pair. Okay, theoretically you're supposed to have one restriction site every 65.5 kilo base pairs. Okay, so this is based purely on mathematical terms. In reality, as I said, the genomes, the ATGC composition of genomes varies. Okay, so you may have to set up a digestion to actually come back and check it out in the lab, whether these predictions hold good or not. Okay, so let's for illustration purpose, let's just say that we take an intact human DNA, right? And then you cut them with a 4 base pair cutter, right? Which is, for example, in this case, they have given an example of RSA1 site. Then you will have too many fragments. You will have too many fragments. The average size is about 256 base pairs. Okay. If you take a 6 base pair cutter like EcoR1, then you are going to have about one cut every 4 kilo base pairs. Okay, so it is shown. Compare this to this. Okay, now compare this to an 8 base pair restriction site. For example, not one, it is going to cut on average once every 65 kilo base pair. Right, so this is the average fragment size. Okay? This can vary, but this is the average fragment size. So if you were to understand how many fragments it is going to generate, okay, for calculation purposes, this instead of 3.2 billion, 3 billion base pairs have been put. So if you were to take a 4 base pair cutter, it's going to generate almost like 12 million fragments. Okay. If you were to take a 6 base pair cutter, it is going to generate about 700,000 fragments. And if you were to take an 8 base pair cutter, it is going to generate close to 50,000 fragments. Okay. Now, among these, suppose you are interested in, understanding your gene of interest, so it is like finding a needle in the haystack. Suppose you have, for all practical purposes, people do not use this. People do not use a 4 base pair fragment. Although in the beginning, when people were trying to, make genomic library, and when the 6 base pair cutters were still not available, people would use a 4 base pair cutter because it was available freely. Okay, and then they would vary conditions. Okay, so that you can generate suboptimal this thing. So, but that is no longer used. But now people routinely use this 6 base pair cutters like EcoR1, Hindi3. They use different restriction enzymes for generating library. Okay, as I said, when it comes to prokaryotes, genomic library serves the best. The average size of a gene in prokaryotes is about anywhere between 1 to 2 kilobase pairs. And you can imagine very well that, when you use a 6 base pair cutter, you are going to, the average fragment size is around 4 kilobase pair. That means the probability of finding your gene of interest intact is fairly high. Here it is going to get chopped into small pieces. This kind of serves optimally. Here, when you have 64 kilobase pairs, and you may have several other genes. So, this is probably the best choice, and people still use, 6 base pairs cutters for making the libraries. Okay. Once you make a library, once you have done restriction digestion, the next step is to ligate. Okay. Ligation, typically what happens is sticky ends with complementary base pairs can form hydrogen bonds, and DNA ligase essentially, helps in the formation of phosphodiester bonds between the plasmid DNA and your genomic DNA or cDNA. For example, After your restriction digestion, this is the EcoR1 site, GAA-TTC, okay, and hydrogen bonds aligns, and the DNA ligase essentially covalently rejoins this, okay. Remember about the intramolecular and intermolecular reactions, whether it is intramolecular or intermolecular, DNA ligase essentially catalyzes the formation of hydrogen bonds. DNA ligation is promiscuous because, although any two sticky ends can come together, and, any two DNA species, right, can mix together, and the DNA ligase doesn't discriminate. All it needs is one phosphate and one hydroxyl group, it will join them. For example, you can take plasmid DNA and human DNA. The DNA ligase doesn't discriminate. As long as, there is a phosphate and a hydroxyl group present on the vector and the insert DNA, it will go and join them together. So this plasmid with parts of human DNA, it is now, it's a promiscuous DNA because that doesn't happen naturally, right? Naturally, plasmids do not carry any human DNA. It is you have made this, right? That's why I said DNA ligation is a very, very promiscuous process. Okay. Cloning is this specialized DNA technology which enables us to produce multiple and exact copies of either a single gene or other segments of DNA, okay, enough to obtain, for further studies. You can have enough copies so that you can do further studies. For example, as I told, suppose you guys have gone to a trip, you found a novel bacteria, and somebody is interested in that bacterium, okay. You can't, by conventions, you can't be shipping that bacteria to other people in the world, but you can always make a genomic library, and you can share that genomic library with any researcher in the world, whoever is interested, okay. Cloning requires a vector. It requires, which is a specialized DNA sequence that can enter into a bacterial cell. Although it says living cell, it's generally a bacterial cell or a yeast, okay, which can also tell us that the vector has entered into the cell, which means we need to have some way by which we are able to identify the presence of the vector, okay. It also needs to have some base by which the vector can reproduce itself, and along with the foreign DNA it carries. This is something that we have already seen earlier, okay. This is a typical vector, a plasmid vector, which carries an origin of replication. It carries a selection marker, right? It also carries what is called as the multiple cloning site. Right? So many different restriction enzymes. So this is the latest cloning vector. We had seen PUC, right? PUC is like the stable workhorse. This is an advanced version of PUC, which is called as P litmus. Okay, the small p stands for plasmid, right? All right, so contains unique restriction sites to facilitate the creation of recombinant DNA molecules. It also has, different characteristics, for example, it needs to have some kind of a selection marker. In this case, ampicillin selection marker is commonly used, but you can also have other markers like tetracycline or, any other marker, Um, so when you use these plasmids, plasmids can stably carry up to 15 kilobase pairs of foreign DNA. Although this is a very rare phenomenon, carrying 15 kilobase pairs is a very rare phenomenon. Typically, beyond 2 to 4 kilobase pairs, the plasmid becomes unstable. Okay, it starts losing parts of the foreign DNA, okay, and starts getting rearranged. Although theoretically you can go up to 15 kilobase pairs. Then there are E. coli phages like lambda phage. You have a phage called T1 which can accept up to 25 kilobase pairs of foreign DNA. Then you have cosmids. Cosmids are nothing but a combination of phage DNA and plasmid, which can take up to 45 kilobase pairs. Then you have artificial chromosomes called as bacterial artificial chromosome, yeast artificial chromosomes, which can take inserts up to almost like anywhere between 100 to 500 kilobase pairs for bags or bacterial artificial chromosome, and can have up to 1000 kilobase pairs in yeast artificial chromosomes. Okay, and you also have what are called as HACs or human artificial chromosomes, which can take up almost like 10,000 kilobase pairs of DNA. Okay, when human genome was being sequenced, right, they typically ended up using literally almost all of these things. People used BACs, YACs, cosmids. They also used, for plasmids for sequencing the entire human genome. Okay. All right. So there are three steps, right? So this is the plasmid, okay, and this is the entire genomic library, right? I mean, genomic DNA that you've isolated from. It could be from any organism that you're interested. Then you will be cutting them with restriction enzymes, right? So a restriction enzyme is going to break this genomic DNA into small fragments, okay, and then you're going to use the same restriction enzyme to cut this plasmid vector. Then you will ligate them together, and then you are going to have a recombinant plasmid that is going to carry parts of your genomic library, genomic fragment. Okay. The step two is transformation. You have to introduce this ligation mixture. You have to introduce this ligation mix into the bacterial cells by a process called transformation. Okay. Some people also use viruses. So this is called as transduction. People, for routine purposes, for routine cloning, we would rather use transformation, not transduction. Okay, because this is more easily accomplished. So people would rather use transformation. And then you need to have some way by which you are able to select for the recombinant clones, right? For example, we had already talked about blue white selection, how to make sure. So this is the one. If you were to take that PUC vector or litmus vector into transform, they're going to give you a lot of blue colonies. Okay. On the other hand, if you have been successful in cloning your foreign gene in the multiple cloning site, then typically your laxy genes reading gets disrupted, and you are going to have white colonies. Okay, blue colonies typically metabolize this chromogenic substrate called XGAL. Okay, which gets broken down into two of these components, and then when this 5-bromo 4-fluoro 3 hydroxyindole gets exposed to air, okay, it gets oxidized and it forms a blue dye. That's why you will be able to do a blue white selection. In these whites, typically what happens is, this reaction doesn't happen. Okay, as I said, lysis reading frame is disrupted, and so it is not able to convert it. Okay, and so you will not have this in the any clone that is carrying your recombinant insert. Okay. Okay. So what is a genomic library? Quickly, we will summarize, and we will probably see a short video if it is possible. So a genomic library contains all of the DNA sequences that is found in the organism's genome. Okay. The complete DNA of the organism, what we call as genome, is cut with appropriate restriction endonucleases. Do you want to choose a 4-base cutter, a 6-base cutter, or a 8-base cutter? That choice depends on you. But by and large, as I said, people would rather use the 4-base pair cutter. Okay. And then each of these fragments is inserted into a vector, and then it is ligated, right? The specific clone that carries the target DNA sequence now needs to be identified, isolated, and characterized. Suppose, for example, you made a genomic library, and then somebody says, I would like to look for genes that are similar to, say, LAGZ gene, something that looks very similar to LAGZ gene, right? You now have a collection of about 700,000 colonies, okay? Out of this, only one of them is supposed to have your gene of interest, right? Your LAGZ gene, like something like LAGZ gene, right? So you need to figure out how to identify the clone that is carrying something like a LAGZ gene out of these 700,000 clones. Okay. Okay, so the process of subdividing a genomic DNA into clonable elements and inserting them into host cells is what is called as creating a library. Some people call it as clone bank, some people call it as gene bank, some people call it as gene library, genomic library. So a complete library by definition contains all of the genomic DNA of the organism of interest, right? So it could be bacterial cell, it could be any other. So DNA libraries provide specialized catalogs of genetic information. So DNA library is essentially going to tell you, how many genes are there, how are they organized, right? All those different pieces of information. Okay. And they generally are useful for gene discovery or gene function study. This beyond the ambit of this, but typically novel genes are found by sequencing complex mixture of bacteria and then doing a thorough bioinformatic analysis, and that has resulted in the identification of several new genes. We will probably, when we do applications from MolBio, maybe we will discuss it. So this is schematically, suppose this is a eukaryotic chromosome. This is your gene of interest, the red fragment. Okay. Then you would, isolate DNA fragment. Okay. Discut with restriction enzyme, and you are going to, incubate with the ligase. So this is going to give you a recombinant which then gets transformed into bacteria. Now these blue fragments will also get ligated. There is nothing that is going to prevent them from getting ligated, but somehow you need to know, how do I screen for this, or how do I identify this? There are ways and means by which this can be done. Okay. So this is another schematic which essentially shows that these are different genes. These are color coded. They're color coded. So you have a green gene, you have a yellowish gene, you have a light blue gene, you have a kind of a dark blue gene and an orange gene. Okay, and so these are cut with the restriction enzyme, different restriction enzyme, and they get ligated. For example, in this case, you can see, two different clones getting cloned. Okay, two different genes getting cloned, but you will have every fragment gets ligated, right? Every fragment gets ligated, okay? And when bacteria take up, bacteria also don't have any preference, right? Bacteria will take up any foreign DNA. Okay? It is the intrinsic property of that DNA. See, plasmids are stable. Plasmids are stable. Sometimes these foreign DNAs can have certain special properties by which sometimes they can, mostly they are propagated stably, but once in a while, sometimes things can go bad. For example, if the sequence if this region turns out to be a highly repetitive sequence, right? It is a mixture of repetitive sequence, and E. coli generally doesn't like it. It generally, deletes it or it removes it. Okay, and so there are rearrangements sometimes, but by and large, okay, these fragments, okay, are carried, and you now have a clone, each of them carrying multiple copies. For example, as shown here for gene 1 and gene 2, as it gets ligated, this plasmid starts dividing. the bacteria also starts dividing, right? So you have a pool of bacteria that are carrying your gene of interest. Okay. Now there is one simple formula. Suppose from the entire genomic library, right? You have about 700,000 clones, and you want to know what is the probability, what is the likelihood that I will be able to get my gene of interest. This is given by a formula shown here. This is called as Carbon and Clapp formula, okay, which is denoted by N, or how many colonies you need to screen, okay, is given as a function of natural log 1 minus P divided by natural log 1 minus F, where this capital N is the number of necessary recombinants that you need to screen, okay. P is the desired probability that any fragment in the genome will occur at least once in the library, okay. And F is the fractional proportion of the genome in the single recombinant, which essentially is given as I by G, where I is the insert size. Remember, we talked about different plasmids can carry up to 15 kilobase pairs, the phage can carry up to 25 kilobase pairs, and all those things divided by the genome size. Okay, so this works out to be a massive number actually. Okay, for example, if it is E. coli genome, for example, which is 4 million base pairs, and if the average size of the insert is, let us say, 1,000 base pairs, then about 12,000 clones are required for what is called as the three-fold coverage. Typically people don't go for one-fold coverage. People go for multiple fold coverage so that your chances of identifying your gene of interest is higher. Okay, you can't be doing 10 times, but you definitely want to do at least 3 times. For human genome, assuming that this is the genome size, about 80,000 bags or bacterial artificial chromosomes with an average insert size of 150,000 base pairs will constitute what is called as a 4-fold coverage. We will come back and look at this in the subsequent classes. All right. Any questions? I will share this as and when this gets done. All right. Any questions? All right. If no questions, then we will meet tomorrow. All right.
Thank you, sir.
Yeah.
Thank you, sir.